even though you're going to be reading chapters 1 and 2 on your own, and you have to obviously read the whole chapters, take notes to really understand what's in the content that's within those chapters so you can do your exercise and your quiz, I do want to bring your attention to a couple key elements that are in the chapters, and just to make sure, again, that you hear it from me, so maybe hopefully these lessons really stick in your mind. The first one is in chapter 1 when they talk about what makes something newsworthy, and that's really important to understand. So they give a few examples. I'm not going to name them all, but a few of them would be like timeliness, proximity, celebrity. These are kinds of basically gauges, a way that somebody can gauge this makes this news story important, that this story needs to be covered, and that's how journalists get to decide really whether they write a story about something or not. That's how we decide. The Washington Post decides what goes on their front page, what goes onto the web, what do they blast out on social media. Newsworthy plays a big part of that. So understanding what makes something newsworthy is so important in media, not just for journalism, but even for public relations. For public relations, oftentimes you as a public relations practitioner are pitching to journalists saying, hey, we think this story is important, you should cover it. Well, you should be able to convince them that it's newsworthy, fits one of those key points that makes it newsworthy. So understanding it really helps just the media ecosystem. So in your chapter, take the time to really understand and learn about newsworthy and why that's so important in media. What I also want to bring your attention to, and this really fits into chapter 2, is how a story is broken down. Stories are, even though they're all a little bit different, they kind of follow a certain structure. And one is they all have a main focus, a main point, basically. What is this story about? And sometimes there's a few pieces of a story, but ultimately you should be able to, in one sentence, describe what this story is about. And that goes along to what your lead of your story is. And you're going to see that's talked about in the book too. The lead is the first sentence of the story, and it's the hook. It's the who, what, when, where, why. That's called a direct lead, but it's usually just giving all the information you really need to know about that story so that after one sentence you can go, okay, at least I have a general understanding of what this story is about. So your stories always start with the most important information. You might hear the expression, or you may have heard it already, don't bury the lead. That's really important in journalism and in media writing. What that essentially means is you don't wait until the middle or the end of your story to tell what the most important part is. You don't want to bury it. Put it there right on the top, give the key information early on the story, so the reader knows instantly what this story is about. And your book does a good job explaining why you want to do that. You also then usually have in the second or third paragraph what's called the nut graph, and it just sums it all up. It's basically, all right, we gave the key facts in that first sentence, and now we're going to give you a quick explanation. So that's just kind of expands on your lead, and within a few more sentences, you have a holistic picture of what your story is. Then you have quotes and background information, and your book goes into that, the structure. But it is really important to understand the structure of a story. You want your lead up first, you want your nut graph, you want to make sure you get a few key quotes up early in your story. Some background information comes after that, talking about the history, what led up to this event or this moment or whatever it is that your story is about. And then on the bottom of your story is kind of like those non-essential facts. It's things that make the story maybe interesting, but you don't need to know them. And that's the basic structure of any news story or any press release, and what you guys are going to be doing. So in your exercise that is assigned for homework, that's basically what it is. Make sure that you understand in that chapter, read that chapter in chapter 2, and understand how you're constructing your stories. But what I just verbalized to you is basically the formula that you're going to be using for that exercise and then for stories as you go on. So read the entire chapters. What I just told you now is more just to direct your attention to what I think are some of the more important pieces of those chapters. But make sure that you understand that before moving on. What makes a story structure, what makes good story structure, and then what makes something newsworthy. Those are two key pieces you really need to understand for this week.